I'm here to talk to you because I think autonomous vehicles are failing, and that's a good thing. In fact, not only is that a good thing, I think it's something we should celebrate. Let me explain. One of my favorite memories from the pandemic was working with my 9-year-old daughter on her science fair project. We were sitting around the table in the kitchen and we were talking about the concept of the hypothesis, an educated guess that you develop after observations and data gathering, and specifically the concept that the hypothesis can change at the end of the experiment. And as we were talking through the various steps of the scientific method, it hit me. The similarities between the pandemic and autonomous driving. And the similarity is that we're watching, in both of these scenarios, the scientific method play out in public, where failures are happening in front of the public eye. Now, typically, we're used to this happening in the privacy of the business, where businesses pour hundreds and thousands of dollars into finding all the ways that it can fail, building prototypes, testing that, and generally identifying that the product doesn't fail that way. But that's not happening with the pandemic, and it's not happening with autonomous driving. Now, with the pandemic early on, we got a lot of varied guidance from the CDC and from other health organizations. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. The mask will save your life, the mask will kill you. You don't need it if you're outside, you do need it if you're inside. Even recently, the White House and the CDC said that if you're fully vaccinated adult, you don't need to wear a mask. Now, many people called this or considered this wishy-washy, back and forth. They weren't sure, they don't know. I think it's something that we should celebrate. I think we should celebrate that scientists around the world were constantly working, gathering information, learning about COVID, helping us to make better decisions about how to deal with it. We're seeing this play out with autonomous vehicles. We're not just going to magically fast forward to a time when we have an autonomous vehicle in everybody's driveway. We're going to have failures. But within those failures, we have to celebrate the progress that that failure represents. One of the first very public failures of an autonomous vehicle was the accident in Phoenix with the Uber. This was the first autonomous vehicle that struck and killed a pedestrian. Now, in this scenario, the investigation that happened after discovered the sensors on the car actually saw the pedestrian coming across the street. The algorithm used to classify the object that was seen didn't say that it was a person, and didn't say that it was an object that needed to be avoided. And the car kept going. But why? Why are these trials and errors playing out publicly with the pandemic and with autonomous driving when we don't have that in other sectors of our life? Well, in the words of the famous African mandrill, Rafiki, it is time. The timeline, it's time. Time is the thing that separates COVID and autonomous driving from the rest. COVID wasn't planned. We didn't have 2 years to develop a timeline, to develop our response and put together a vaccine. It happened right off the bat, and we had to deal with it. And the scientific community was tirelessly working to gather information, and as they learned, their recommendation shifted. And as they learned more, the recommendation shifted again. This could perhaps be the most dangerous challenge for autonomous vehicles: consumer confidence and time. Now, with autonomous vehicles, the back and forth and the impact of the scientific process playing out publicly is different. Here, we're seeing people react. Just like with the pandemic, where we don't believe the scientific recommendations and some people don't wear masks, with autonomous vehicles, people don't believe. They don't believe that autonomous vehicles will be safer than human drivers. So we have bad reactions. We have knives and rocks being thrown at autonomous vehicles. We have sabotage happening with holograms being put up in streets and electrical tape being put on speed limit signs to confuse cars. This is intentional sabotage. These are not failures worth celebrating. They're not failures that are on the path to success. But these failures and the failures that are playing out in public are connected. They're connected because they're all in the car. They're all in the public. They're playing out publicly. Car companies are seeing this, and they're responding. They're changing the way they fundamentally build and test the car, changing the way they bring the car to market, changing the way they bring the consumer along with them. Recently, we've seen a big shift in the advertising and positioning of the role the car plays in your life. It's no longer just about getting from point A to point B or how many stars the new feature has. It's about the safety of your family. It's about your experience. It's about the whole journey, not just the singular entity that you're getting in to move. We have to embrace this complexity. We have to embrace these failures because of the progress that they represent. Now, humans are complex. We don't just do stuff because it's good for us. You can't just tell humans, hey, go do this thing. It'll help save your life. We won't just go do it. Now consider the challenge of getting a society of people into an autonomous vehicle. Consider the challenge of getting a society of people to take a vaccine. Now let's consider a far simpler example, a seatbelt. Here's an interesting statistic. Now 2020 is a weird year, so I went all the way back to 2019 to get this data. In the United States, in 2019, 22,000 passenger vehicle occupants were killed. 22,000. 47% of them were not wearing a seatbelt. 47%. That's mind-boggling. Think about all the things your car does to annoy you when your seatbelt isn't on. The beeps, the increasingly faster beeps. Yet 47% aren't wearing a seatbelt. Now it is incontrovertibly known that wearing a seatbelt can help save your life inside of a car. Automakers have been building in safety features to enforce us to wear a seatbelt for decades, but people still don't do it. Now the step of getting society into an AV is going to be far greater than simply reaching over your shoulder and putting on a seatbelt. We have to embrace the complexity of what we're going through. We have to embrace the failures that are happening. And we have to embrace the success that these failures represent. And we have to embrace that because it's not just consumer confidence that's being impacted. Now consider these two competing headlines. On one hand, you've got a headline about a Tesla being crashed, about the autopilot feature. But it doesn't name the driver. It doesn't name the 21,000 other drivers who were in a car accident last year. It focuses on the one failure that happened. Now, the headline is right. It's accurate. Now, here's a second headline that claims the use of an autonomous driving system can lower the chance of an accident by 10x. Now, that's the headlines you don't see. That's the headline we need to be focusing on as a consumer. Just like with the pandemic, we need to understand the story behind the headline and make educated decisions for ourselves. Now, you as a driver, if you get in an accident, you'll generally learn a lesson, take away something from that. You may share that lesson with your friends and family. You might teach your kids that lesson when you're teaching them how to drive. But all the drivers on the road aren't learning from that. They're not gaining experience from that. We're not publishing lessons learned summaries so that we as a society of drivers can become better. But the autonomous vehicle can help us do that. When the autonomous vehicle has an accident or a crash, the lesson learned from that accident scales. It scales to all of the platform, to all of the autonomous vehicles that are connected to that technology. And that's the impact that AVs can have. Learning, getting better, improving. Now in industry, we talk about vision zero. Zero accidents, that's the goal. But it's not the compare. The compare is 22,000. The compare is us, people, and how we drive. As an industry, as a technologist, as a consumer of the future of mobility, it is incumbent upon us that we embrace the failure and celebrate the successes that that failure will mean in the future. To me, that is how we succeed. And that is how we realize Vision Zero.